Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Mark.
How are you, Praveen? You well?
I'm good, thank you. And how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Mhm.
Not too bad. Yes, no, we've more or less managed to sort out the elderly for the time being, at least.
That is correct. Absolutely.
It's a never-ending labour, but
Well,
we're reasonably stable as of this morning, at least.
absolutely.
Great. So, I see, Anna.
Hi.
Yeah,
Hello,
Hi, Anna.
I'm here. We're finally all here.
Great. Okay. So, Pravid, are we all set to get going?
yeah. We are, Mark. Let's get going. So, formally welcoming everyone. Thank you for joining for the Journal Club, and um, it's great to have you all here, and very pleased to welcome um, Dr. Mark Wetherall, who is the president-elect of the World Headache Society, currently working in the NHS UK, former president of the British Association for the Study of Headache. And we also have with us Dr. Ana Peralta from Guatemala. She is um, one of our trainees with the World Headache Society 2 year fellowship in headache medicine course. Um, so over to you, Dr. Wetherall and Dr. Peralta. Thank you.
Yeah, super. Thank you very much indeed, Praveen. We're finally here after a number of false starts, and the idea of the Journal Club really is that hopefully, once we sort of get into the swing of things, that we're going to each month, you probably most months, at least on the first Monday of the month, that we will meet to discuss a paper or papers. Uh, and the idea of this, if you've not really been to one before, is twofold. I mean, one is obviously to sort of to maybe learn something about the content, the content of the paper. And then the second really is just to sort of have a little bit of a think about the way that scientific papers are put together, the purposes for which they are constructed, and the quality of the product. And it's all about sort of kind of learning how to read the literature in a sort of informed way. Any of you that have tried to write scientific papers will understand that it's not a small undertaking. So nobody does this, just accidentally. Every paper that is published, there is a reason behind it. And obviously, one of the things when you read the literature is to try and understand that. So this is actually quite a good example of that. I think this paper. It's a kind of sort of interesting one. So, Anna, I'm going to ask you to present the paper, and what we'll do, I think, is we'll just I'm going to allow you to kind of just run through your presentation, and then what we'll do is that then after that we'll kind of open the floor to anybody if they've got any questions or any comments about the paper, and then we can have a conversation about what arises from it. So I'll hand over to you, Anna, if you want to. You've got your presentation. You want to share it with us?
Yes, I am going to share my screen. I think we can all see it now. The slides.
Yep,
This
that's
is the
great.
journal club set to be set to be on January the 6th, but it's happening now. This this paper is from the Annals of Headache Medicine. It was published in August 2024. But it's called the efficacy of continuous non-inhaled intranasal carbon dioxide in the abortive treatment of migraine. It's a result from 3 randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials. I will clarify this for you in the context of the paper. As a background, well, the carbon dioxide gas infused into the nose and sinuses potentially blocks the nerve activation of the trigeminal nerve and subsequent neuropeptide release, probably through the inhibition of voltage-gated channels. This is a graphic example I tried to do as the accumulation of the carbon dioxide with water. We got carboxylic acid, then we have bicarbonate and hydrogen, and then we have these protons on one side of the membrane. So it inhibits. There's no gradient. There's no voltage gradient. So the polarization can't happen because the channels are blocked. There's potassium-induced depolarization suppression. So it's fast and non-invasive access to trigeminal cervical and nociceptive systems in alleviating migraine is feasible only through the nose sinuses and local anesthetic sprays or SBG ganglion blocks. In rats, Travassis and their team demonstrated that carbon dioxide insufflation into the nostrils, insufflation was related to antinociceptive and analgesic effects suggested by tolerance of the stimulation of the cheek, of heat stimulation of the cheek. These were 3 studies conducted by Catnia Incorporated, which is a company that was sold. They made these studies in 2000, 2002, and 2004, but as I told you, it was sold. But so they never published this. There's another European company interested in the mechanism of this and wanted to publish these results first to have other investigation ongoing into having their own brand of or their own way of doing this. So this is just the first attempt of having this mechanism to alleviate migraine. The objective was determining the efficacy, tolerability, and safety of continuous non-inhaled carbon dioxide into the acute or abortive treatment of migraine. There were 3 randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trials with 350 subjects. This was the intention to treat population with migraine according to the ICH definition. And it was to determine the tolerability and safety of 317 subjects exposed to the treatment. 2 hours post-dose modified. This was the modified intent to treat population. And it was to be determined the efficacy in the modified intent to treat population. And in the, I'm sorry, I can't see the entire. To make this small. I can see. And then the rest of the population at 15, half hour, 1 hour, and 2 hours, and 24 hours post-dose. In the freedom of pain, freedom of headache-associated symptoms, and headache treating migraine headaches of mild, moderate, and severe intensity. The first trial was in 2000. This was a CH 2000-2. They included 18-year-olds or older, at least 6 months of history of migraine with or without ARA, with moderate to severe intensity headaches per month. The subjects attended to the investigative site within 6 hours of the headache onset, and they were given 100% of concentration of CO2 or 100% nitrogen, which was the placebo, through a nose piece into the nostril. They selected the time and held their breath, how much time they wanted to have it, and they had to hold their breath. The data acquisition through a computer continuously recording the flow rate, the RR, the transcutaneous blood carbon dioxide pressure, the BP, all their vital signs. Defined headache relief as a reduction in headache intensity from moderate to mild or no pain, and calculated the probability of differences using the exact t-test. The 2002 methods was again 18 years old or older with a 3-month history of migraine with or without aura. This was an outpatient study with moderate or severe headaches with 100% of a concentration of CO2 at 5 milliliters per second or 15 milliliters per second. Or there was an empty can dispenser with a nose piece containing a flow control valve connected into a small cylinder filled with liquid carbon dioxide. The subject selected the high or the low dose, and the placebo group had an identical cylinder, but it was empty. They were instructed to have it done for 60 to 90 seconds while minimizing the breathing. They had to repeat it. They could repeat the dose up to 6 times in the first hour intervals within 15 minutes, and could take abortive medication only after 2 hours of doing the CO2. And the third trial was in 2004. It was called ESCAPE. They admitted 18 to 17 years old people and at least 12 months history of migraine with or without aura, moderate to severe headaches per month, with at least 48 hours between them and 6 or less months of migraine. Outpatient trial was moderate to severe headache with 100% CO2 at 10 milliliters per second, or a can with no gas, which was the placebo. This time there was only one dose. If you notice, the last one there was 15 or 5 milliliters. This time there's only 10 milliliters per second, or the placebo. They had to feel the nasocinial system for 90 seconds while minimizing breathing. They had to repeat within 3 to 5 minutes intervals within 2 hours. And they were 153 subjects randomized 2 to 1 with the G-exact test and the Fisher exact test for 148 intention to treat population. And these are the results. They had, this is all that they analyzed. They were 88% of female. The age was 44 years old. In mediate, the moderate headaches was 54% for the CO2. The severe headaches were 46%, and the duration before treatment was 3.5 hours. Before they this is for the first trial in which they had to go to the center and had the treatment applied within 6 hours of the headache onset, which I think was very hard to do. This is their total doses. Most people had 5.2 liters in total. The number of doses were 4 in average, and the duration between periods was 30 minutes. The duration dosing period. The sample size was calculated at 76, but they had to end it because it was hard to, they had to end it before because it was hard for people to get to the treatment center. So they didn't really get the exact amount that they wanted. There was no change in the vital signs in the people they could actually have, and there were no significant adverse effects. All the adverse events were nausea, sensation of odor, nasal irritation, watery eyes, throat discomfort, dizziness, and vertigo. Mostly. The efficacy, they eliminated 4 subjects due to protocol bias, and 2-hour relief was 36% in the CO2 and 33% in the nitrogen, in the placebo. So there was no difference between both of them. This is the second trial in the 2002. These are the baseline characteristics of the people. Female gender was 79% for the carbon dioxide. The average age was 41.6 years old. The Caucasians were 86%. The average migraine history in years was 19, and average monthly migraine frequency of 7.2. The headache intensity at the time of treatment by group in this trial was this one, in the carbon dioxide. The severity was, the headache intensity in both groups for the carbon dioxide and the placebo. They said it was not relevant, but I believe there's a difference. There was less severe headaches in the carbon dioxide group and 17% in the placebo group. And these are their statistics, their results. In the figure 1, we have the efficacy of treatment defined as pain-free in the modified intent to treat population, in which we can see there seems to be significance within the 2 groups. And in the efficacy of treatment defined by the intended to treat per protocol population seemed to also have been. I'm sorry, I can't take the pictures here from the Zoom because I can see the entire. Well, and here we have table 4 for the treatment emergent adverse events by group of the modified intent to treat population on the second trial. The adverse events were mostly nasal irritation with 31%, nausea 11%, dizziness 7%, and we didn't have many of them, and none of them were severe adverse events. But there were people who stopped the medication because of these events anyway. This is for the third trial. Baseline characteristics are 77 females in the carbon dioxide group versus 89 in the placebo. Average age 41 for the carbon dioxide and 41 also for the placebo. The Caucasian race, 96% for the carbon dioxide and 82% for the placebo. The average migraine history in years of 18.6 and 15. An average monthly migraine frequency of 4.2 and 4. The headache intensity at the time of treatment before they started, there was no difference in intensity and associated symptoms in both groups. Here we have the efficacy of treatment defined as pain-free in per protocol population in the third trial. There seems to be a statistical difference between when they did 2 hours and 24 hours for the carbon dioxide. And this is the efficacy of treatment defined as 2 hours post-dosing in the per protocol and in the third trial. I don't think I can, I hope you can see it entirely, but I can't see it because of the phone. So there is also seem to be significant difference, a statistical difference between both of the groups. And this is the third trial had a lot more to be seen in the results. They analyzed a lot more data. This is the efficacy of treatment defined as reduction in headache intensity from moderate to severe or from mild to no pain, as defined as headache relief in the per protocol population. And only at 1 hour, there seems to be a statistical difference between both of the groups. And in the other symptoms, non-headache, there seems to be a significant difference in photophobia group. So this is the discussion. Sorry. Well, other than the abortive treatment of migraine, CAPNIA studied the efficacy and tolerability of non-inhaled intranasal carbon dioxide for the treatment of rhinitis, of seasonal rhinitis. This is another time they use the technique. So that's why they wanted to apply it to migraine. This resulted in a successful non-prescription product of the symptomatology for allergic rhinitis in the UK and Ireland under the brand name Senence. Unfortunately, the sponsor never completed the development of the program for migraine. The purpose of the reporting of this trial is because of the author's belief that all reports, all clinical trials in full need to be published in full for the benefit of the society, whether meeting the objectives or not, the endpoints or not, and continuous non-inhaled intranasal CO2 remains as a possibility, as a possible option for abortive treatment of migraine. These 3 trials represent the phase 1, the 2 part of the clinical development of the product treatment option. In the first trial, a third of the subjects experienced 2 hours headache relief with the treatment. The caveat is that trial did not meet the required randomization. The second trial was with outpatients and could treat mild intensity headaches of enrollment, and the enrollment completed. The intranasal irritation occurred in almost 1/3 of the patients. There was efficacy in mild, moderate, and severe, which negatively correlates with the intensity. This was an expected biological effect. And the third trial was repeat of the second, but only for moderate to severe headaches, according to the FDA requirement. And 97% of the enrollment, they got only headache relief with were statistically significant, and also addressed the blinding, which seemed rather adequate. The critique for the article is that the demographic data was very reduced. They did not address more than the Caucasians, and did not analyze or didn't analyze the results according to these variables. Did not analyze which abortive medications were used by the patients when addressing 24-hour relief, because they could take their other medications 2 hours after they used the carbon dioxide. Did not mention the use of prophylactic medication or the exclusion criteria, or whether this was an exclusion criteria for them, sorry. Did not include the comorbidities of these patients, did not address whether it was a primary or secondary migraine, and included the third trial non-migraine headaches, but did not characterize them. I'm sorry, shall I go on? Also, the instructions for not breathing during the treatment might be confusional. I know some of my patients wouldn't be able to cope with that very easily. The risk of overuse because of repetition instructions, they instructed them to repeat if they needed 2 or 5 minutes afterwards. I don't know if that will work for everybody. They did not analyze the dose efficacy with the 2 to 8 repetitions, but did not analyze the impact of each repetition, if it was efficacy from 1 or it was only efficacious with 8 repetitions. I agree with the publishing the results, whether they're meeting the primary endpoint or not. And I think it's relevant because of expanding the possibilities to other possibilities of treating migraine. In the conclusion, the 3 randomized double-blinded placebo-controlled trials reports suggest continuous non-inhaled intranasal carbon dioxide to be relatively safe, relatively well tolerated, and moderately effective for the acute or abortive treatment, warranting further clinical development. These questions for discussions. Do you think this could be a new treatment for acute migraine in the future? Do you really think these 3 studies prove that CO2 non-inhaled but intranasal could be used without medical supervision for people? And would you like to change the design of the study, or would it be enough with more subjects for it to convince us? I think those are all the questions that I suggested.
Very good, very good, Anna. That was a really good discussion of the 3 papers, and I think you drew out a lot of the kind of the interesting features there. Before I kind of kick off, does anybody else have anything they want to ask about the papers, or any questions that arise immediately from what Anna's just kind of run us through?
Just
Okay. Yeah.
sorry, just out of curiosity, why is it mentioned non-inhaled intranasal? And obviously, there's inhalation at some point, and the carbon dioxide is flowing. Is there any particular reason it's mentioned as non-inhaled?
Because of the adverse events they mentioned of inhaling too much CO2, because it could cause, I don't know, dizziness, also nauseous. They say it's at a dose, it can be dangerous to be inhaled, so they instructed them not to breathe too much.
I think the question is more to do with the word, the usage of the word, because I mean, by definition, inhalation is something which happens automatically, isn't it?
Exactly. That's something I also had my
I think
questions.
I guess it's probably, isn't it more to do with the fact that what they're trying to do is they're trying to get high concentrations of CO2 in the sort of nasal passages, and they're trying to kind of prevent kind of washout of that as much as possible if people are holding their breath. I presume that that's why they're doing it. I mean, yes, I mean I mean, I get, I mean, I, I, I struggle with this to get my head around what these things look like and how the people actually use them, because I think. Uh, but you know, the idea of these studies seems to be that they want, they seem to want direct kind of diffusion of carbon dioxide uh, through the kind of nasal mucosa, I think, don't they?
I believe that's what
The
they
idea,
were.
and this is one of my issues with this. This is because the rationale for that is potentially, you know, it's a bit like intranasal lidocaine targeting the tri you know the sort of, you know, the ganglion. You want kind of direct access to the trigeminal system, but then they're talking about the mechanism of this being to kind of suppress cortical spreading depression, which is an aura process that happens on the cortex. So that's one of my issues with it, because I think it's a fascinating area, and there is a little bit of a history of this, and I've got a short thing which I'll show at the end about that, but it's still not clear to me where where this is really working, and I don't know what you think, Praveen. about the mechanisms of this? It seems a little bit.
You mean what I think about it?
Well,
Right. Okay. So I think because they wanted to reduce the inhalation rate, and at the same time they're looking for increasing the partial pressure of oxygen. And if they're talking about central cortical spreading depression, they're basically trying to achieve more of a systemic change in carbon dioxide tension and affect the processes centrally rather than achieve something more locally. I mean, at least from the papers. Perhaps there's the dual mechanism, as you suggest, makes a lot of sense. But that's something as a pathophysiology of action, that's something which probably is interesting to really look into.
yeah. So, Anna, why do you think this has been published now? What,
Uh,
why is, because, these studies were done 20 years ago.
yes.
Um, why are we talking about this now in 2025?
Well, what they explained it was that they are following after these papers were published, and they want to do better studies now to see if their medication can actually work. I don't know if it's got anything to do with the whole mechanism of SPG block that's a little bit more in use recently.
Hmm.
And there are even some devices to do it differently. I don't know if it's got anything to do with that. They only mentioned the fact that this European company wants to keep developing it, and they seem to be interested now in doing something different than others.
I mean, I think that's. I mean, the answer is quite simple, isn't it? There's somebody somewhere that thinks this is potentially a viable, option for a new device or something else, and what they want to do is they want to. I mean, they're publishing this data because this data, they may be able to start to use this data as, as supporting data for probably presumably getting sort of FDA or European Commission approval for a device of some sort. So, there's going to be a kind of there's a pecuniary basis for this somewhere along the line, isn't there? Praveen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I just thinking aloud, there was there's this adverse events. There was this mention about the nasal irritation, which was more in the subjects compared to placebo. So again, I'm thinking whether because there's nasal irritation, we're basically looking at the trigeminal nerve endings really getting irritated. Uh, so are we really again? Is it got to do with the local retention in the nasal passages, or are we looking at more of a systemic effect of increased carbon dioxide in the body?
Well, let me show you something, Anik. If you can just let me, I'm just going to let me if you
Okay.
stop sharing your screen.
And also counterintuitively, carbon dioxide retention is also associated with headaches.
Well, that is true, isn't it? And that's an interesting kind of thing, isn't it? So this is let me just show you. I've just got I think 4 slides here, but let me just. So again, as you'll see, yes, that should have been January, shouldn't it? So this goes back. The story of CO2 and migraine goes back to the great Harold Wolf. Um, hopefully most of you will have heard of Howard Wolf, if in no other way in the name of Wolf's Migraine, which is kind of the leading sort of multi-author textbook of migraine, which is I think the new edition is going to come out sometime this year. Um, and Wolf was an American researcher. He was really the first person to kind of sort of try and understand the both where migraine pain might arise from in terms of the vasculature, the meningeal arteries, and so on, and also the the effect of ergotamine in particular on vascular changes in migraine. One of the things that they were quite interested in doing. Or one of the things they did was they tried to see if they could treat migraine with aura symptoms with carbon dioxide. So there was a very long-standing observation, and I've had patients that seem to be able to do this. That some people could actually stop their migraine attacks or stop the aura attacks by basically kind of rebreathing in a kind of paper bag. And they tried to reproduce this using a 10% carbon dioxide mixture from gas bottles. And they reported that this actually seemed to work. The problem was that carting around CO2 bottles was not actually a particularly logistically helpful thing to do. And again, the CO2 levels were very high. 10% CO2 is quite a high inhalation, and was felt to be dangerous to use for any kind of particular length of time. So if you fast forward to the 1980s, there are a couple of studies that were published in the early 1980s that use sort of closed rebreathing bags, so literally breathing in and out of a bag. The problem with that is, of course, that you quite quickly deplete oxygen levels, and therefore you can make people hypoxic and pass out. So that was then then that's why people, I think, at around about the time that these studies that we've been discussing today were published, that people started to think about kind of nasal delivery, so that you could try and bypass some of those issues. And this was the published this was published Experiences paper that was published in 2005. Was again kind of localized delivery of CO2, which I think is very similar to what was being done in these studies and around about the same time. The problem is, and I think it's exactly what you said, Anna, actually, about one of the first things that you said about the instructions here. And I think that at the time, the major problem with this is that people found it very difficult to actually use these, the equipment and actually breathe in the way that they had to breathe to get the levels up high enough. And then, of course, what you've got recently is this device that this was published 7 years ago. And these guys were kind of touting this device around the international headache meetings around just before COVID. And this is basically just a rebreathing device. And essentially, it's like a plastic mask with a plastic bag on the other side of it. And you just basically rebreathe into it. So it's essentially a kind of it's like a paper bag, but it's plastic. And essentially that's what they did, is it increased your end tidal CO2 to about 40%. And it did seem to work reasonably well. And again, this device has been around for a few years now, but it's not widely used. So, and then this, the company that make that device, on their website, if you go to their website and you look and sort of see how does it work, this is what they say. Increasing CO2, does it increase cerebral oxygen supply? Well, it may do. We don't really know. Does it counteract vasoconstriction? Does that then stop local hypoxia, which can sometimes precipitate CSD, but does local hypoxia really precipitate CSD? And most people probably not. There's an interesting question about whether it increases the clearance of kind of waste products and things that may mediate migraine. And that might include CGRP, and that might tie in with some of the recent work about how CGRP may actually be released from cortical cells during aura processes and washed out, and then have a direct effect on trigeminal processing as a consequence of that. So nobody really knows. There's lots of different theories about how this process might work. But it's interesting, I think, that the whole kind of, I think you're right, Praveen, the idea of this is that I think it probably should increase global CO2 levels, and that's how it's going to have its effect. Let's talk a little bit about the quality of the studies. So the first study, Anna, it was a negative study, wasn't it? It was that there was no difference between the active and the placebo at all. Why do you think what do you think was the main reason that study was negative?
Well, Apparently, one of the things with this is that it was ambulatory. I mean, not ambulatory, but they had to go to a center
Yeah.
to have the CO2 inhaled. They had it in a can. They had to go. They had 6 hours to get to the place. Most of them got there pretty fast, but many others just didn't show up because they couldn't, because I don't know, they couldn't do it. So it was logistically too hard to do. I don't think it was really that bad. The maybe the mechanism of this medication, but the way they did it was too hard to achieve. So I think that's the reason, the main reason why they didn't see anything.
And what I mean, and yeah, and I mean, what's the general? I mean, what do we generally tell our patients about, acute treatments? When we're sort of telling them how to kind of treat their migraines.
Yeah, it needs to be just as soon as it comes, and even if you can know it before, even
Yeah.
in the aura.
Yeah. So I think that's right, isn't it? Pretty much every bit of evidence that we have suggests that early treatment is more likely to be effective. And I think if they're at, the average duration before they actually even got to the treatment was 3.5 hours. It's too late, isn't it? It was never, I think even if you gave people triptans at 3.5 hours, you wouldn't get, you get some response, but not a brilliant one. And we know that from um, the Actwin mild amitriptyline trials and clinical experience. So that was the first one. So I mean, they obviously decided, they're obviously going on. I mean, what about the second trial? Uh, I mean, what are the good things about the second trial, just in terms of the way that trial was was done and reported?
I believe the second trial wasn't really that bad, but what I don't understand is why they chose such doses, 5 versus 15. Well, seemed to be a little bit too wide. And the fact that they let the patients choose which dose they wanted to have didn't seem too good for me. I don't know if that really could come to a good result, statistically speaking. They seem to have had some sort of good result in the
Yeah, I
efficacy
mean,
of.
I think it's an interesting, isn't it? Because the overall results, I mean, the pain freedom at 2 hours. So firstly, I mean, they presented a kind of modified intention to treat results and also per protocol results. Uh, so just in terms of the quality of the actual trial itself and what they presented, that's an improvement actually. And interestingly, if you the third trial, they only presented per protocol results. Which would you expect to be better, the intention to treat or the per protocol?
The per protocol.
Yeah, the per protocol is usually a bit better, isn't it? Because because of the way that exclusions are done and the way that people drop out, it does introduce some bias, doesn't it? Or it can introduce some bias. So it's interesting. The second trial, the per protocol population did a little bit better, 30%, 36% pain freedom at 2 hours versus 30%. So, ideally there should be, you want an ITT or modified ITT population. I think the other thing that's good in the second trial is that the placebo response rate. What would you expect in a well-conducted trial of an acute treatment in migraine? What would you expect the placebo pain freedom at 2 hours to be? What would be a good ballpark figure for that, do you think?
Um, what would the efficacy of the placebo?
The placebo. What would you expect as a placebo result in a well done trial?
The placebo always works in a
Yeah,
little of the
yeah,
population. So I would expect, I don't really know the
yeah.
how much.
About you'd say you'd expect about 10% pain freedom at 2 hours. Placebo results should be somewhere around about 10%. Most well-conducted clinical trials, that's good. And that's a really useful, quick way of looking at a trial. And if the placebo, if the placebo rate is about 10%, then it's a goer. You can go and have a closer look at it. If the placebo rate is like 25%, then something odd has gone on. And similarly, if the placebo rate is really low, then also something odd has gone on. You'd expect a placebo rate about 10%. So their placebo rate was 9.2%. So that, those figures look, those figures look quite convincing. Now, yes, you're right. They've done what essentially seems to be a dose-finding trial without really kind of calling it as such, and also without really running it in the way that they could come out at the end and say, well, we think the higher dose works better than the lower dose. It's just, as you say, it's a slightly confused picture. And then the third trial, they've only presented the per protocol results, so that theoretically might make it look a bit better. And also their placebo results rates are really quite low.
Yes.
It's only about 4%, 4.5%. So it's a little bit it's a little bit odd. Obviously, in other ways, that third trial, they had bigger numbers. They certainly had very good retention numbers. I think all of the trials um, share the overall criticisms that you can have of migraine trials as a whole is that I mean, they're all largely Caucasian middle-aged women, and obviously that whilst that is a very large proportion of the population in parts of the world where I live, um, then for the rest of the world that's not necessarily a representative population, and that's maybe a conversation we can have on another occasion. But from that point of view. Um, so does anybody else have any comments about the way that the trials, the sort of quality of the trials? Any questions or comments about them? Does anybody else want to make any points?
I would like to say, I think maybe there's something I just remembered. I thought when I was doing this, the placebo might have been a little bit odd because of some sort of smell or the feeling that, because it was an empty can. It was for me a little too different from having something to have nothing.
Mm.
So I believe people would realize they were having placebo, so it wouldn't really act as a placebo. I don't know if you can tell too much the difference, but I would imagine they could.
Do placebos not work if people know they're placebos? It's bizarre, isn't it? Praveed, you know a lot about placebos. Placebos
Yeah,
still work even if people know they're placebos, don't they?
absolutely. Yeah. Mark, I'm just curious now, what do you think in well-conducted trials? Why do you think it's around 10%? And why do you think in some trials it's of course up to 20 to 30% and sometimes low as say 4 to 5%? What could be the factors? Is it just is it as Anna just spoke about, is it the fact that it says gets kind of have some kind of a clue, or is it something in the design of the study? What do you think?
Well, so obviously there's going to be a placebo. There's going to be a placebo level because obviously there's a natural process of resolution. So a proportion of people will just get better from an acute attack if at any given point. And I think that the nature of that, or the idea that maybe about 10% of the people should be recovering um, naturally from that point. I think just goes back to kind of observational studies of the natural history and the natural course of acute migraine events. And I think if you look across most of the triptan trials, for example, which are probably the best example of kind of large scale acute trials, and more recently maybe the trials of the GPANs. Pretty much across the board, you're seeing placebo rates of around about that level. So you should really see that. Now, obviously, if you've got variations from that, obviously some of that may depend on how the trial is run and what people are told. I mean, the classic example is the topiramate, topiramate preventive trials.
Mhm.
So there are the trials of topiramate for chronic migraine. There was an American trial, and there was a European trial which was run by the Germans. And the placebo rate in the American trial, I think, is about oh, I can't remember it. It's something like it's not particularly high because they're chronic migraine patients. I think it was something like about 8, 9, 10% or something like that. In the German trial, or the European trial run by the Germans, it was zero. It's the only migraine trial in history with a zero placebo rate. And you know, and we sort of have to sort of conclude that the patients were told in no uncertain terms that they were not going to get better, whatever whatever they thought was going to happen. That there's this, so I mean,
Interesting.
obviously, some of that will, there will be a play of chance. Of course, there are, all trials, you know, the whole, every p-value, 5% of will fall outside the normal range by simply by the play of chance. But as I say, I think the issue is if you see a placebo rate that's significantly distant from say 10% for an acute trial, then you just need to look at it and think, well, actually, has that trial been properly done, and are there other factors here that may impact upon those response rates? I mean, we know that placebos rates are generally higher for more interventional treatments. If you look at the monoclonal antibodies, the highest placebo rate is for eptizumab, which is an intravenous infusion versus subcutaneous treatments. That's sort of to be expected. So yeah, so a number of reasons why that might be.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to have any sort of final comments on the on either the kind of the papers, the kind of concept of CO2 for migraine, or on the presentation?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it would be interesting to look at the what's happening to the EEG maybe, because anyways, it's an acute trial. I'm just thinking out loud. Again, what's really happened? Is there any sort of changes happening because of a neuronal suppression? Is there something like bordering on CO2 narcosis, or because some of them had other effects like bit of confusion, vertigo, and other symptoms, I believe, with the CO2 group. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I think I mean, I mean, I mean, this is one of these. I mean, this is one of these areas where actually there's relatively little, and I personally, I think it's really good that they actually did publish these papers because, it just, I mean, the literature is tiny, really, and actually just, any additional information is quite interesting, and we have no treatments for aura. We have nothing that we can, we've got nothing that we can give people that will stop aura attacks. And whilst for a huge proportion of our patients, it's the headache phase that is the main problem. For a not insignificant set of people, actually, it's the aura that is really troublesome and problematic and distressing. So anything that might get us towards a potential treatment that could be used for that, then that would be great. I think I guess the issues with all of this is going to be the practicalities of actually turning an interesting clinical observation
yeah,
and an interesting series of studies into something that actually is going to be practical. There are these guys out there at the moment that are kind of touting this thing that you put in your nose and you try and stimulate your trigeminal ganglion, and you have a conversation with the companies that are kind of deriving these devices and say, well, look, this is great, but how are people actually going to use them?
yeah,
It's all very well providing a pill, it's all very well providing a nasal spray,
yeah.
or a device like that, but how can you turn this interesting clinical observation and interesting clinical trial, which Anna, as you say, Anna, is kind of, within a controlled environment,
Mhm.
into something that is a practical thing that people can use, out in the real world. So.
So yeah, I mean, there are a few people who have reported increased headaches after hyperventilating as
Mm.
part of practicing yoga. And there's this pranayama exercises where there's rapid, shallow, and deep inspiration as well. So there is a CO2 washout because of the continuous, prolonged hyperventilation. And a few of them have reported, even though because they know they just heard that yoga is beneficial, and so they've tried that, but then they have reported that at the end of that they've had increased headaches. It's also curious, it would be interesting to even, if suppose if you want to, for example, the real world, as Anna put it, would you advise patients if maybe try reducing, the respiratory rate voluntarily, or maybe try breathing through a paper bag, but as people advise during panic attacks. But again, there's safety issues there. So it's really, I mean, at least from what are we safe enough to really advise patients based on the available studies, or do we need to wait more? The
Yeah.
verdict, the verdict is out. Is really.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I have suggested to people breathing in a paper bag.
Mhm.
I don't think I've killed anybody by doing that, but I don't think anybody's I haven't had many people come back and go, this has been the answer. So I think I think the jury is very definitely out. But it's a really interesting area, and a very nice one to start off our journal club with.
Lovely.
Okay, so look, I'm gonna draw to a close. So the most important thing is to say thank you to Anna for tying together that presentation. It was a really good presentation, and I think you really drew out a lot of the salient features of the papers very well, and the discussion was really good, and you brought out the most important and most interesting points. So thank you very much indeed for that. You've set a
Thank you
nice
very
high
much.
bar for people coming after you, which is really good.
No, no. Thank you very
I
much.
think what I would encourage those who have attended, if you are keen, then please do make your interest known to Praveen or the course organizers for the WHS. The next journal club will be on the first Monday in April, so it'll be on Monday the 7th of April, and it will be an hour earlier than this one, and that will be our usual time, hopefully going forward.
Yes. Manasa is here. Manasa, would you advertise that in the website? Because that's going to be a regular every month from now.
And what we'll do is that, I mean, again, if anybody has papers that they would like to either discuss themselves or have discussed, please do let us know. I've got a couple of papers that I'm quite keen that we should have a chat about. So we might get somebody to do those in April or May. But if you've got ones that you think are really interesting, then please do bring them to the club. The idea is that we want to be driven by what you find interesting, because there's always going to be stuff that we can talk about, and there's always going to be stuff that we can draw out, and so that's how we'd like to run it. And the more that you can guide us in terms of what you're interested in, then that would be great. Okay,
Thank you so much, Anna and Mark. Thank you. Thank you so much for
brilliant.
this.
Nice to
Love
see you all, and
to see you.
for those of you who have much of the day left, have a lovely day.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye
Thank
bye.
you very much. Nice
Thank
to
you.
see you.